Hi, welcome to the April 10th, 2024 meeting of the Redmond Planning Commission. I'd like to call this meeting to order. It's exciting to welcome 3 new commissioners this week. We'll start with a roll call. Commissioner Coleman.
Present.
Commissioner Copley.
Present.
Commissioner Gagne.
Present through Teams, appearing virtual.
Wonderful. Commissioner Van Nymen.
Present.
Commissioner Woodyear.
Present.
And I am Vice Chair Weston. Commissioner Aparna is excused this week. Would like to thank the following staff for being present tonight. Kathy Beam, who it's her last meeting, so thank you for coming. Glenn Coyle, Lauren Anderson, Ian Lefcourt, Becky Fry, Lauren Alpert, Audra Cardenas, Tim McCarg, and Chris Wyatt. Next, I'd like to look for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Great, that's approved. Next, we are going to elect a new chair and vice chair of the Planning Commission. So these roles serve a term of 1 year. Our previous chair left the commission, so as vice chair, I'll run today's election. We'll start by electing our new chair. So commissioners are welcome to self-nominate. The elected chair will run the election of the vice chair and the rest of the meeting. Are there any nominations for chair?
I'd like to nominate Susan Weston for chair.
Anyone else? Any other nominations?
Seconded.
All right, this isn't a second one. We just get to go around. All in favor of myself as chair?
Aye.
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 Great. Thank you. And next, vice chair. We're going to use the same process. Are there any nominations for vice chair? I'd like to nominate Commissioner Woodyear.
Second.
Any other nominations? All right. All in favor of Commissioner Woodyear as vice chair?
Aye.
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 Lovely. So we have a chair and a vice chair. Thank you. Next up is public comment and items from the audience. We have 3 public hearings today, so this section is only for public comment on unrelated issues. Is there anyone here to speak?
There is one, Mr. Bob Yoder.
Great. And if you could, please keep your comments to 3 minutes and start with your name and address.
Thank you. Bob Yoder, Redmond 98052. I just kind of follow you on TV and stuff, and I think you were talking a while ago about having a market up in the neighborhoods, and I think that's a great idea. I was also thinking that maybe a food truck or some little cafe, something smaller than a food truck, that we could bring up there. It might stimulate the businesses as well, provide an economic incentive to create new jobs, but also it could bring into a gathering place or a place to stop off on the way to work to get a cup of coffee, and maybe near somewhere near a transit center or something. So that was just one idea, and I hope you'll consider it. And the other one is bringing up the density up into the neighborhoods. That's been discussed. And I talked with my wife about it. She's concerned about the parking there. And I think with an ADU, don't you have certain requirements for parking? I think so. No, you don't. And I don't know if that could be a problem, but it's something to, obviously, I'm sure you're thinking about. The other thing I'd want, if we do it, is make sure that the buildings blend in with the rest of the neighborhood so that they don't, no more than, like, say, 3 stories high, something like that, because, I mean, that seems to be about as high as they go. I don't know when that's going to go into place and how you're going to zone for it and what the Director of Planning and Community Development's going to do as far as when she's going to go ahead with it. But I don't know if you can find developers or, landowners that would do this, and I don't know if you're reaching out for them right now. But anyway, thanks for the work you do. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, our next item is the public hearing on the natural environment element and the critical areas regulations update for Redmond 2050. I'd like to introduce Kathy Beam, Lauren Anderson, Tim McHarg, and Glenn Coyle.
Thank you, Commissioner Weston. We have a short staff presentation. And again, my name is Kathy Beam, Principal Planner. To my left is Lauren Anderson, Senior Planner. As you mentioned, this is my last meeting because I'm retiring. And so Lauren will bring this to closure. Online, we have Tim McHarg as well as Tom Hardy, who is our Stream Enhancement Planner. So you've got the whole team here with you this evening. So if I may, I will bring up our presentation and share that. Okay, so I will give a high-level overview, and Glenn will chime in on some of the policy information. But we are here tonight for the public hearing for the Redmond 2050 Natural Environment Element, as well as the Critical Areas Regulations Update. Project overview, we have a comprehensive plan amendment in, of course, for the Natural Environment Element that is running in sync with the Redmond 2050 work. Zoning code amendment that will address the Critical Areas Update, as well as the map updates. And then we also have a limited shoreline master program amendment, and that is necessary because we are updating our stream typing systems and we need to be consistent with that. Shorelines of the state in Redmond would be Evans Creek, Bear Creek, and the Sammamish River, as well as Lake Sammamish. So we're just making sure those pieces are properly updated to be consistent with the proposed critical areas regulations. Oh, Glenn, sorry.
So this slide just provides a context for requirements related to a natural environment element or chapter in a comprehensive plan. And legally, a standalone element called natural environment is actually not legally required under the Growth Management Act. Essentially, under our land use planning, we're supposed to have policies related to our critical areas and things like that. So what the city does is a lot of our high-level policies related to that go into this section, this chapter we call natural environment element. And it's intended to also, just because there are so many policies, we don't really want to have it specifically in the land use element, and also because it's a high priority for the city. But it also serves as a home for other policies related to sustainability, environmental stewardship, air quality, light pollution, noise pollution, other things like that. And we also use it to align with our required shoreline master program. So just keep those things in mind as we talk about that element. Okay. Kathy?
Yes, and so what are critical areas? I mean, this is just for those with the benefit of the viewing audience. Under the Growth Management Act, they consist of fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, and those would be our streams, our river, federally and state listed rare and endangered species, habitats and species of local importance, naturally occurring ponds under 20 acres, and the key to 20 acres is anything over 20 acres falls under the jurisdiction of the Shoreline Management Act, so we're capturing what isn't captured at that level. And then land essential for preserving fish and wildlife habitat connections, as well as riparian management zones, just to give a flavor of what is encompassed in those areas. Wetlands, of course, are defined by state law. I think everyone's pretty familiar with what wetlands are. Frequently flooded areas would be our 100-year floodplain, and that consists of both the floodway, which is the faster moving water, and then the flood fringes, which is the backwater area. Those two combined equal the 100-year floodplain. And then critical aquifer recharge areas. In the city, we have, as we call them, CARA 1, which has a 5-year time of travel max. In other words, that means if something were to unfortunately spill into our aquifer, it would take less than 5 years for it to get to this particular area, the CARA 1. Then CARA 2, critical aquifer recharge area 2, is a greater than 5-year time of travel. So if something spill, it would take longer than 5 years to get into our aquifer. And of course, most of you know a good portion of the city is served on groundwater, the areas to the east of the Sammamish River. And then lastly, our geologically hazard areas. And those areas are either landslide hazard areas, which is typically we refer to as 40% slopes and greater, erosion hazard areas, and then seismic hazards. And regarding seismic hazards, I mean, the whole Northwest isn't a seismic hazard area, but nonetheless, those are defined under growth management. As far as our objectives of the update, it's pretty clear. We want to ensure we're compliant with the Growth Management Act. We also want to ensure we're consistent with state agency guidance documents. And these would be the Critical Areas Handbook and Critical Aquifer Recharge Areas Guidance, which is published by the Department of Commerce, as well as Wetland Guidance and Wetland Mitigation, which is published by the Department of Ecology, Repair and Ecosystem Management Recommendations, and Water Crossing Design, which are published by Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and Stream Typing and Technical Guidance, which is provided by the Washington Department of Natural Resources. So there's a whole variety of documents we use, but I just wanted to highlight some of these state documents because they are definitely our overarching documents that are reflected in our regulations. And those are all supported by best available science, which is required under state law. We also have some revisions to the code to provide clarity, new information that has come up, and then, for instance, updating the maps based on newer information. And then, as Glenn mentioned, we want, since the natural environment element is being updated, we want to ensure that the policy update, and we're coordinating with that as well as Redmond 2050. So moving on from there, highlighting the key changes in the proposal, we've, as far as policies, Glenn spoke to, they've been streamlined and consolidated. We have proposed a revision to our stream typing system, which is more consistent with the Washington Department of Natural Resources stream typing, but it also gives special consideration to anadromous fishery, which are salmon species. So we want to ensure that we're consistent with that aspect of the Growth Management Act. We're also looking at increasing minimum buffers for landslide hazard areas. The current code requires a 50-foot buffer, but you can get down to 15 feet with geotechnical studies. We're proposing still 50 foot, but you can only get down to 25 feet versus 15 for safety reasons. So that's in the code. Another key change is implementing building setbacks from critical area buffers. This is being done for two reasons. One is to address adequate functional yard areas. We do have some developments where literally the critical area is like 5 feet off of the house. And we require those areas to be fenced, and it doesn't really give functional yard areas, or we get what we call the creep, people kind of using the critical areas in as part of their yard. And also, it helps decrease temporal loss of impacts. In other words, if we have development that comes almost adjacent to a critical area, they're inevitably going to be in that buffer or critical area to construct, and so we want to try to avoid that in the future. And then lastly is the map portfolio update. We're proposing updates to the stream maps, the wetland maps, frequently flooded area map, and the groundwater time of travel maps are being added in. Those updates are our attempt to provide the general public with the most updated information the city has. The way the code is written, it's the site-specific studies that govern. Just because you're on a map doesn't give it 100% certainty, but it alerts, hey, this is an area that we need to make sure that we look at. But it's always site-specific studies that govern on that. And then, Glenn?
So as noted, and this will be kind of a little bit repetitive, but this slide kind of shows what the overall update from the current, what we call the Redmond 2030 plans, natural environment element, compared to this update. The first item is that we just kind of revised our what we call framework policies, which are the even though all our policies are very general, high level, we have even higher level general policies in the comp plan that we call framework. So the current natural environment element had 6. We're proposing to streamline it down to 3 to kind of follow the 3 main sections of this element, which is environmental stewardship, environmentally critical areas, and then the last 3 sections that we call more like quality of life type environmental policies. So we have framework policies that really support those. The primary big change is section B, the environmental critical areas, as Kathy just noted, and all those policy updates were done in conjunction with the critical area regulations updates to support that, and all the different reasons for that. We also streamlined, as noted, there were about 105 of those policies. We tried our best, but there are still about 70 of them. But that you can see there are a lot of subsections and categories of that. Other updates we had done for this element too, we consolidated and updated our tree canopy policies to better support the tree canopy strategic plan, which also had come out during the Redmond 2050 process, and I believe still has to be adopted by the city or is in the process. So those policies were updated to support that. We had a section on climate change related policies. As we noted before, we're doing a new climate resiliency and sustainability element. So a lot of those policies that were in there have moved to that element. That doesn't imply, though, that none of these policies do not support climate resiliency and sustainability. All these policies also contribute to that. But the climate resiliency element are really also those high-level policies the city is doing specifically. So just want to make that distinction that it's not an either-or. They kind of reinforce each other. So that's really the updates to the natural environment element. So we'll skip this. As folks just might remember, we've gone through Planning Commission. I believe this is our 3rd time. We just had different changes of different drafts, and appreciate all the community's feedback, Commission's feedback, council. So we had a couple, few different iterations as we've updated this. So this is pretty much the final draft of that. So next.
And then,
Close it out.
yeah, okay. And then as far as schedule, obviously we're here today for the public hearing and then looking at coming back on the 24th to follow up with any study session as a result of public testimony that you hear or additional questions that the commission has, and hopefully get to a recommendation with the report approval in beginning of May. And so with that, the technical committee is recommending the Planning Commission support the proposed zoning code amendment, the limited shoreline master program amendment, and the comprehensive plan amendment revisions, and forward a recommendation on for consideration. And we are here and happy to answer any questions you might have.
All right, are there any questions from the commission before we open the public hearing? All right, then I will open the public hearing. And Glenn, if you could start us with our commenters.
Yes, we have 2 speakers. The first is Bob Yoder.
Thank you, Bob Yoder, Redmond. I felt like that owl when I was going over the technical committee report. And there's a couple of things, I guess, that I could ask, and I sent you a letter about this earlier, that riparian to me is just so important for Redmond. I'm talking right now, is the critical area that I'm concerned about, or I'm interested in, and I hope you are, is fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas. They're basically lands. The conservation area is a land, if you want to wordsmith, but it's the fish that live, the riparians grows vegetation on the land, and it provides all the shelter from the sun, keeps the water cool, does lots of things to keep the salmon thriving. So we need good riparian. It says in the technical committee, there's a couple of shalls. It says there shall be no net loss of riparian functions and values. Please, if you would, go over that. Also, it says there's a shall, buffers shall be sufficiently wide to achieve full range of riparian and aquatic ecosystems, functions to protect in-stream fish habitat through the control of sediment and control of temperature. So, and then there's the land outside the riparian that's important for holding water and conveyance. I am really happy when I went over and looked at the buffers about, it looks like there's a net gain of the type S streams from Bear Creek west of Avondale Road. It was 150 feet, I think, and now it's 200 feet. So is that a net gain? Also, there's 150 feet at Bear Creek. The old buffer was 150 feet at Bear Creek east of Avondale Road, so now it looks like it's 200 feet based on the type S. So thank you for the net gain. And as far as Evans Creek, you seem to be very interested in Evans. We all are. And I think the riparian, we really need to build riparian there because it's all reed canary grass. That's invasive. It does nothing for the salmon but strangle them. So I hope the city, you will encourage the city to really rehabilitate, actually not really rehabilitate it, but build riparian, plant trees there, shrubs, or whatever they can do there. Because there's a lot of salmon that goes up Evans. I want to, one thing on the Nelson Village. I don't know if type S is shoreline of the state, but the Nelson Village is going to go in, and is that going to affect the riparian that goes along the Sammamish River? It's something to consider maybe in the future. The last thing I want to thank Kathy for the work she's put in over. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is David Morton regarding the natural environment critical areas.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm David Morton, Redmond 98053. The draft policies for the natural environment element have several strengths. First, the policies cover a wide range of environmental issues, including stewardship, geologically hazardous areas, aquifer recharge areas, floodplains, wetlands, water quality, fish and wildlife habitat, tree preservation, air quality, noise, and light pollution. Second, there's a clear emphasis on promoting sustainable practices like low-impact development, renewable resource use, and sustainable consumption strategies. The policies prioritize and incorporate best available science, ensuring that actions are informed by scientific understanding and knowledge. Fourth, the policies emphasize community engagement and education programs to raise public awareness of environmental issues. There's room for improvement or refinement. First, some policies could be more clearly articulated or consolidated. Second, more specific mechanisms for enforcement and accountability may be needed. Third, the document could further emphasize the integration of natural environment policies with other city plans like transportation and land use to ensure coherence in overall planning. Fourth, establishing clear monitoring and evaluation mechanisms to assess the effectiveness of implemented policies would aid adaptive management and continual improvement. Here are specific recommendations. First, strengthen collaboration with neighboring jurisdictions, agencies, and community stakeholders to address regional environmental challenges more effectively. Second, integrate climate resilience considerations to address the impacts of climate change on the natural environment. Third, promote the incorporation of green infrastructure practices to provide multiple benefits. Finally, consider incorporating public health considerations like access to green spaces to promote healthier communities. Overall, the policies demonstrate a comprehensive approach to environmental stewardship and protection and provide a solid foundation for addressing environmental issues in Redmond. Further refinement and integration with broader city goals and community needs would strengthen their effectiveness. Regarding the critical areas regulations, the good things are, first, the regulations cover various critical areas comprehensively, including wetlands, floodplains, and aquifer recharge areas. Second, the regulations emphasize the importance of protecting critical areas and maintaining their ecological functions. One way of assuring this is by restricting land uses which are incompatible with critical areas. Third, specific performance standards are outlined, providing clear guidelines for development within critical areas. What's not as good, first, some points are redundant. Second, only one example is given of a land use that poses a high risk of contaminating groundwater in the CARAs. Here are recommended improvements. First, give more examples of land uses that pose a high risk of contaminating groundwater in the CARAs. Second, consolidate related sections to create a more cohesive and structured document. Third, eliminate redundant points. Fourth, enhance accessibility by providing a summary or guide to help users navigate the regulations more effectively. Fifth, clarify implementation, offer examples or case studies to illustrate how the regulations apply in practice. Sixth, address the concerns and needs of stakeholders, including developers, environmentalists, and residents, and it's been suggested perhaps the next generation. Seventh, ensure the regulations are updated regularly to reflect changes in environmental science, legislation, and community needs. Here are additional considerations. First, explore incentives for developers who surpass minimum requirements to encourage proactive environmental stewardship. Second, raise awareness about the importance of critical areas and the regulations governing them. Third, develop robust monitoring mechanisms to track compliance with the regulations and enforce them effectively. Finally, consider integrating provisions for adaptation to climate change impacts such as sea level rise or increased flood risk. Overall, the regulations demonstrate a commitment to environmental protection. Consolidation and enhanced implementation would maximize their effectiveness and usability. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is it for speakers.
All right. In that case, I'm going to close the verbal portion of the public hearing, and then we'll leave the written testimony open.
For written comment?
For written comment, yes.
Okay, sorry, not to interrupt. I guess we can review the issues matrix, and if there's any other questions.
That would be great.
Yes, okay. Let me pull that up.
Probably not. Why?
So on the note, there were two outstanding issues from the previous. First was 4B. I'm just going to pull it up on the screen. Unfortunately, it was Commissioner Aparna's comment, and I know she's excused tonight, but we do want to note that we did address that, and it's noted in the issues matrix, and that specifically was an update to policy NE29. We changed some of the language there to make the intent more clear. So.
Yep, that's great, and we'll let her close it when
Yes.
she's back.
Okay. Second outstanding issue, and I guess it was more of a question, and it was Commissioner Van Nyman, it was just related to geological areas, and I know you just,
You can close it.
okay.
I just wasn't here last time.
Yeah, so we just want to make sure that was clarified. Okay. And that was the only outstanding issues related
Right,
to this.
any
so.
new questions? All right, Vice Chair Woodyear.
Yeah, and just, I'm looking at policy NE 17 and NE 18. Given the importance of critical areas, I just was looking for clarification on why would we use the language avoid versus prohibit? Like, what happens if land uses and developments are not compatible? Why would we not just make it prohibited? Avoid just seems very loose.
On the screen. And see 17 and 18?
Yeah, I don't have the document open, sorry.
Give me 1 sec.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it says right there, 17 and 18.
Okay.
So make it a little bit stronger.
Yeah, I think so, because given the importance of the environment and critical areas, avoid just provides a loophole to circumvent. So why would we use the word avoid instead of something more stronger?
Okay, the avoiding of the creation of new parcels has to do with impartial mitigation sequencing, which is the first step you do is avoidance, minimization, rectify. So the term avoid is commonly used, but we can certainly look at another word choice if you would prefer.
Wasn't very clear because I wasn't thinking about the word avoid in terms of sequencing. I was thinking about avoid as, well, just try to avoid it. And if you
Oh,
can't avoid
I
it,
see.
then it's okay,
Yeah.
which is not what we would want to do.
Correct.
So I think it would be really helpful if you could just clarify that.
Okay.
Unless you think I'm the only one who just misunderstood that.
No, I mean, if one person's reading it differently, we want to make sure it's clear.
I think it depends on the level of familiarity, and this is an important one, so kind of going to the less familiar reader to make sure that they're getting the correct information out of it.
Okay, we can noodle on that a little bit and come up with trying to clarify that.
Amazing. Anyone else? Commissioner Coleman.
I just had one question. I was going back to the presentation document where we talk about aligning with regional and county policies related to the natural environment. And I'm trying to understand where we see it in the documents as well. Like, where's the language, that language align as well is relatively loose. How do we think about that? Where does that come in, and how does that show up in the alignment side of things?
The alignment with the state policies?
With the regional policies,
With the
and even city policies next door.
Yes, so the policies actually in alignment have to do with Vision 2040,
2050.
2050.
It's actually noted in the technical committee report. There's a table in there that shows that too. But
Glenn, I don't think your mic is on.
Oh,
not to interrupt Kathy, but there is a
No,
table in
yes.
the technical committee report that also shows regional policies and kind of how they relate to the ones in our city type policies. So.
which would be the countywide planning policies.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, that was the question. Appreciate it.
Sorry.
Commissioner Van Nyman? Oh, no, okay. Pardon me. I had one question that I wanted to clarify from another public comment, which is the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife took issue with Table 2164020. And basically my question here is, I remember there being information in the presentation over the fall about why the stream classifications were done the way they were, but I couldn't connect that to their particular comment. So I just wanted to give an opportunity to explain why Redmond is relabeling streams the way they are, and then the impact on the buffer.
Sure. So we have two different agencies that deal with streams. We have the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, which is the ones who submitted the comment letter, and then there's the Washington Department of Natural Resources, which has the stream typing system that's in the state law. the wax. And so what we did was tried to look at a hybrid approach and still give special consideration to anadromous fisheries. So like the way that typing is, like with the S stream, as Mr. Yoder testified to, and some of the different symbology, that aligns with the Washington Department of Natural Resources stream typing system. Where it diverges is where we give special consideration to anadromous fisheries. So some of our typing is modified slightly for streams that have salmonid species or the potential for salmon, and then streams that have potential for fish, non-salmonid species, and whether it's usage or potential. So that's kind of the typing system. And then Department of Fish and Wildlife then has their riparian management zone regulations, and that's what we've tried to be consistent with as well. And Lauren and I and Tom, and I think there were a few others, or maybe just the three of us, met actually with Department of Fish and Wildlife back in September. And the typing, and more importantly, their recommendation of 200-foot stream buffers did come up at that meeting. And the 200 feet is being recommended by Fish and Wildlife because that relates to what's called site potential tree height. So if you're looking at stream buffers, and the average site potential tree height in the Northwest in our region is 200 feet. If the tree falls, you're getting the leaf litter, the debris, the small wood, the large wood, and that helps benefit the riparian ecosystem. We had to pause and step back. The reality is that we're in an urban growth boundary. We need to absorb a certain amount of population and jobs over the horizon of 2050, and I don't need to tell you about that because you're right in the midst of all that. So 200 feet stream buffers on every stream in the city of Redmond is not a realistic approach. We've actually, Tom has graciously done a quick and dirty map of what that might look like in the city, and it's amazing to look at, and we're happy to pull that up if you'd like to see it, of the amount of areas that are already built. Now, yes, on the shorelines of the state, those are all 200 feet, and we still have the ability to achieve that. But in our lesser order streams, it's just not realistic to think in an urban growth boundary with 3 urban centers that we can achieve that. If we were a brand new city, that is a commendable goal to head towards, but I just don't think it's realistic, and it doesn't set us up for success. Would you like us to pull that stream map up, or?
I actually, not necessarily.
Okay, we can always include it with additional information in your packet if you'd like to see
It would be interesting to see later perhaps, but it's, that explained, it did seem like there was an interagency flavor.
Yes.
To this perhaps, but I really appreciate the description.
Sure.
Does anyone else have other questions?
Just a comment, I'd like to see that map also. And is
Okay.
that map available to be overlaid digitally on other maps?
Yes, it's overlaid on an aerial.
Great, thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, anyone else? Well, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And so I think the next step is to get those issues on the issues matrix for your next meeting.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, our next item here is going to be a public hearing on the SEPA regulatory amendments and Overlake Neighborhood Plan Addendum for Redmond 2050. So coming up will be Lauren Anderson and Becky Fry.
Good evening, Commissioners. So I'm Becky Fry, Principal Planner with the Long Range Planning Division. Happy to get to a public hearing tonight on the SEPA regulations and the Overlake Neighborhood Plan Addendum. Go through a quick review. So the majority of the SEPA regulations that are being updated tonight are within the Redmond Zoning Code Section 2170. That is where the categorical exemptions that are allowed under state are located, as well as information about any other SEPA actions that we like to do in the process that we undergo. So the changes that are being proposed in this packet are we're expanding categorical exemption thresholds to match recent state updates. We're adding infill exemptions to take advantage of some new state infill exemption allowances. We are updating the Overlake Planned Action. We are also doing some technical updates. For instance, we're removing his and her language and other just cleanups. There are also some updates to general procedures and requirements and substantive authority sections. For instance, in the substantive authority, we're only listing documents that actually have SEPA-related authority. And so it listed a whole bunch of documents, plus some names have changed over time, different document titles. So we're not necessarily changing the actual SEPA substantive authority, but we're actually just cleaning it up and making it match what our current documents are. And also, there are some recent state law changes about processes, timelines, and that type of thing that are going to be impacting the Redmond Zoning Code Section 2176. And we're making sure that 2170 language matches the changes that are happening in 2176 and cross-references to it so that we don't have any potential conflicts down the road for changes that are inconsistent. And we were also going to be now moving the planned action applicability and mitigation measures to a brand new Redmond Zoning Code Appendix 11. And the main reason for that is because there's actually substantial, and we didn't want to really overwhelm 2170. But also, then we could more easily update Appendix 11 if mitigation measures need to adjust to best available science over time. So it's actually a little bit easier to update appendices. So as you see on this, oops, let me go ahead. Apologize, it didn't actually share, and I just noticed, so let me get that back at there. Okay, so you see on the slide deck, the map is the map of where the infill exemptions will take place. Within 2170, it actually calls out and creates the new SEPA infill exemptions. For downtown, there will be a separate Marymoor Village infill exemption and a quote-unquote citywide infill exemption that will be most of the rest of the city and annexation areas. It doesn't cover everything, and so we've specifically called out on the map where those are applicable. They do not overlap. They're all each separate geographic entities, and we'll be tracking the progress for each of those applicabilities separately. Because, for instance, there might be slightly different concerns with downtown, for instance, than somewhere else. Like we know that there's a sewer connectivity issue over time that has to be addressed. And so this map, it will be available online. It will be searchable. You'll be able to zoom in and figure out which one is applicable to your property. Within 2170, it goes through the details of what's allowed, what the thresholds are as well. The Overlake Neighborhood Plan Addendum is being updated because we have to get recertified for the center. We are also updating the Overlake Planned Action, and the Overlake Planned Action uses the information with the Neighborhood Plan Addendum as one of its foundation documents. So these go hand in hand. They are an action related to our SEPA documents. All of these actions are implementing the Redmond 2050 environmental impact documents. So all of the documentation for these actions you can find in the draft environmental impact statement, the supplemental draft impact statement, and the final environmental impact statement. In particular, the information about the Overlake Planned Action and the infill exemptions are documented in those documents. One of the things to note is the Neighborhood Plan Addendum does not create new policies. The policies in the addendum are from the comprehensive plan. You have already reviewed and approved all of them. They come from the centers and overlake pieces, the transportation, housing, all of those things have just been assembled, and they've been assembled in such a way that they easily answer the checklist for recertification. So there's some additional level of detail on some of the charts, but the actual policies and most of the text is actually cut and paste from several other documents. So there's a couple of things in specific that we wanted to call out and point out as changes from the document that was published for public hearing based on conversations that we've had at previous Planning Commission meetings. But this one I wanted to also point out because I misspoke last time. There is an existing single-family dwelling, categorical exemption under state law and adopted in the city that we are not changing. But because I overlooked it when I was skimming through it, I'm proposing this slight restructuring just to make sure that all residential are together and make it more simple and easy for everybody to find. Because if I skipped it when I was reading through, other people might as well. So this is just simply reducing some duplicated text and actually just making it easier for people to read. But it is a textual change, so I wanted to point it out. The other one is actually in response to comments from the Planning Commission at our last study session. The request was to make sure that our new neighborhood mixed-use zone can also use the paragraph 229-2A exemption, which is the one that allows for residential development, mixed-use development, and commercial of up to 65,000 square feet. So that mixed-use development going into that new neighborhood mixed-use development can also fall under this infill exemption. And so the other paragraph that we're referring to in state law for infill exemption is actually 229.3, which is the most recent state update that happened last year that just says all residential can be qualified. I do want to point out, there's been another comment received even today, just clarifying that the infill exemptions are only allowed under state law if you have existing environmental regulations that take care of all the considerations and concerns, and that we have documented that that is the case. So it does not negate the environmental regulations. It's actually a requirement that we have them in place to address all the considerations. And so this is just a procedural document. Everything had to be documented, and it was documented in our environmental impact statement process. So the critical areas regulations, the tree regulations, all those things still do apply. So this edit has been made. This is your issues matrix. It's the only item on the issues matrix. It shows how that's been documented in the change. But those two are edits from the version of the code that we had publicized for the public hearing, so I did want to call them out. Okay. That is done with my presentation, and I'll turn it over to Chair.
Great. Do any commissioners have questions before we get started with the public hearing? All right. In that case, I will now open the public hearing for the SEPA regulatory amendments and Overlake Neighborhood Plan Addendum for Redmond 2050. Glenn, do we have
Yes,
people
we have one
signed
speaker,
up?
Devin Kellogg.
Great. If you could start with your name and address.
Good evening, planning commissioners and staff. My name is Devin Kellogg. I'm a parent, teacher, and stable climate advocate living in Education Hill. I'm here tonight to give testimony on the new SEPA amendments. First of all, I support the efforts to streamline and target affordable middle housing and job development within existing neighborhoods and near bus transit hubs. However, this should not be at the expense of our health, safety, and environmental sustainability goals. At the previous meeting, I mentioned several items that concern me about the impact exemptions that would be allowed in infill areas throughout the city. Specifically, I mentioned three concerns: tree canopy, Protection and the potential for heat island effects if too many trees are removed. Runoff, especially as non-permeable surfaces are added. Air quality, climate, and safety considerations of fossil fuel infrastructure build-out, especially as we are in a seismically active area. And Principal Planner Becky. So these items are covered in the news process. Thank you for that clarification. My question is really about the process. What mechanism assures in those impacts, environmental impacts, will be considered as permit applications are evaluated? And then in the final EIS, the response to my concern was that the city can periodically review the infill exemption to ensure results are as intended. And I don't know if there's a formal process defined to evaluate that. That would be another concern of mine. So if you could please clarify how these concerns would be considered in both the application and evaluation process. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak?
That is it. Thank you.
All right, so then I'm going to close the verbal portion of this public hearing, and we will keep written testimony still open. All right, so back to Becky for our study session.
As I mentioned, the only item on your issues matrix was the amendment to allow the neighborhood mixed use. If there is any other item you'd like to add to the issues matrix or go through now, the other thing that we could do is if you feel like you're ready to go ahead and close the public hearing and provide direction to staff to prepare the Planning Commission report. We would come back not at your next meeting, but the meeting following to allow time for the actual minutes to be a part of that packet. So if you feel like you're ready to go ahead and make a recommendation, you could close the public hearing. If you'd like to continue, we can come back and if you need to. So my question for the Planning Commission is, are there any other discussion items? Is there anything you'd like to add to the issues matrix or any other comments or questions for me tonight?
Commissioners? No, it looks like we've covered everything that we want to cover here. Are people ready to have the report created? For new commissioners, should we just walk through this process really quickly because this is their first time seeing it?
Sure.
So I'll let you.
Yeah, I'll just walk it through really quickly. Once the Planning Commission has made a decision on that they would like to proceed, it doesn't have to be a unanimous decision. It could be a split decision and we have a minority report, which is the minority can submit to the council a different opinion or a different reasoning. What we do is we gather all of that information together and we create a Planning Commission report. It includes the legal notice, it includes the minutes of your public hearing, it includes all of the technical committee report information. That is all assembled and then brought back to you for your review and approval. Once you have signed off on that, then the chair would sign it and we then present that to the city council. So this next step is you can choose to either continue your public hearing and discussion, or you could close everything out officially and then make a direction to staff to prepare that report.
All right, so given that background, is there interest in having the public or the report created for the Planning Commission to review? This isn't an official vote. This is just a head nodding. Yes, okay, so that would be great. And so we'll see it not next meeting, but the meeting after that.
Correct. So part of the packet is the actual minutes from the public hearing. But at this time, what you would need to do in order to do that is actually go ahead and close the full public hearing. You had left it open for written comments.
Right. Thank you. Good reminder. All right, so let's close the entire public hearing, again, for the SEPA regulatory amendments, Overlake Public Plan Addendum for Redmond 2050, including the written.
Okay. All right. Okay, so thank you very much. I will go ahead and prepare the report, and we'll be back to you, your first meeting in May. I do also want to let you know that I will follow up with Devin Kellogg with the questions and answers for her tonight.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so third public hearing for the night, third and final, is the public hearing on the Phase 2B elements for Redmond 2050, which includes capital facilities, utilities, and participation, implementation, and evaluation. And for that, we have Glenn Coyle and Audra Cardenas.
Good evening again. So just note that this is 3 separate chapters of the comprehensive plan. We're just going to go through the presentation and hold public hearings on that. I know some of the community comments are probably related to specific of these chapters, but we'll figure that out probably from the comments. But we've been separating that. So just note this is 3 separate chapters that we're having. It was just consolidated for convenience. Otherwise, we'd have to have 7 public hearings today. So with that noted, we're going to be talking about the capital facilities element, the utilities element. That will be me, Glenn Coyle, Senior Planner in Long Range Planning. And then my colleague, Audra Cardenas, will be talking about the participation, implementation, and evaluation elements, which we're going to start calling chapters because a lot of people have confusion on what the term element means. So you might start, well, we're kind of at the end of the process, but you might start hearing the word chapter instead of element, but they're interchangeable. So the ask for the Planning Commission is to hold a public hearing on this, which is what we're here tonight. Continue the study session and review the couple of outstanding issues that we have, identify any additional issues, and then we'll be back on April 24th, and at that time, we would ask that we close out any outstanding issues and look for a recommendation. So similar to the process that Becky had just mentioned, ask for a recommendation, close the public hearing for written comments, and then we can prepare the report. So thank you. So just as an overview, as I just kind of noted, these are 3 different chapters or elements that we're reviewing today. And these are the project numbers within our filing system. So I just want to reiterate the state requirements for capital facilities. Basically, we have to have a capital facilities element that just really has an inventory of existing facilities, forecasts of future needs, locations for like new facilities, at least a 6-year plan, finance plan. That's what we call our capital investment plan. That's actually part of our city budget. But we also do a longer term plan that goes out to the whole length of the comprehensive plan. So for this would be 2050. And then there's also just a requirement to reassess the land use element if certain conditions are met. And there's a policy at the end. It's kind of technical, but there is a policy to cover that. And I should note, there's a little asterisk here. In the city of Redmond, because there can be a lot of data and information related to those first 4 requirements, we have what we call functional plans, which are kind of like the detailed, like operational type plans. So some of the commissioners that have been here for a while, we have a park plan, we have a transportation master plan that's going to be coming through here. We're also updating our wastewater plan, which is going to be coming through commission, our water systems plan. Additionally, we're starting a new stormwater and surface water plan. And what those contain is that detailed information, but it also contains a detailed list of projects, and that's how we fulfill our capital facilities requirements. So just to reiterate, when you start to see those plans come through commission, that's really what you're reviewing. It isn't why this pipe is 12 inches versus 8 inches. It's more the higher level, are we meeting those first 4 requirements? Is there a project list? Is there a finance plan? And that's kind of the intention when those plans come through commission. So with that said, what is new in the capital facilities update? And this just provides the high level. Really the main thing, there's a lot of legal requirements of how we do capital facilities planning, so there isn't that much room to change things, but really the main change is updating the planning horizon from 2030 to 2050. We've updated some of the level of service standards just related to those functional plan updates or state law and other things like that. I know that was the issues matrix question around that. Issues around equity have been considered. We've removed a lot of unclear and outdated terminology. Sometimes what happens, just the terms of the field change over time. We added green infrastructure as a inventory requirement. That's actually related to a change that just came the last year, and as part of like the climate resiliency plan and efforts. So green infrastructure is required. We also added a requirement that our functional plans address resiliency, including climate change impacts. And then the last bullet just notes that we also updated a lot of these, what we call functional plans. So as they come through, it's because of changes to this element. And a lot of it is looking at, for example, our increased growth targets, our increased housing changes, our updated land use map. So all those changes to the big land use assumptions in the city trigger changes to those plans. And the park plan was already approved because that was being updated at the same time we were doing this, and that was approved last year and adopted. So that's capital facilities. I won't specifically talk about the different version changes. Utilities element is actually very similar to the capital facilities, but this really just talks about utilities, both city provided and private. And really, this is, a very kind of more generalized type element. Really, it's the same thing. We're just talking about the location, proposed location, capacity of our different type of utilities. And really, the intention of this element is really just to provide that guidance or to reference state law that when we plan for growth, that there are utility services able to support that growth. So, as if we're changing a neighborhood to residential, we have to consider, can it get electricity? Can it get water lines or sewer lines? That's really the very high level intent of the utilities element, is to provide that kind of mechanism to provide utility service. Over time, sometimes there gets to be more and more policies in that can maybe muddle that message and, type of things, but, try to keep that in mind as really what the intention of the utilities element is. So what has been changed in the utilities element from the current to the newest? We added 2 new framework policies, as we've done for other chapters, one for our city-owned and other for private utilities. We also had a focus on those policies regarding equity and resilience. We consolidated a lot of the, streamlined a lot of the policies from 96 to 70. One of the big changes is that, as I noted, that there's been a little bit of scope creep on the utilities elements. So for example, we had a lot of energy policies that were related to climate change that really weren't utility related, but in our last comp plan update, we added those under our energy utility policies, but they were really more broadly related to energy use versus the utility use. So anyway, those moved into our climate resiliency element. Just consolidated, updated a lot of older programmatic type language. There was also related to that natural gas. There was a strong emphasis in the Redmond 2030 plan about expanding our natural gas type infrastructure. We purged a lot of those type policies, but we note, which is kind of a bigger issue again than our utilities, but we also note a shift that natural gas is not a preferred energy source for the city, but it's still, because it is a utility, it is regulated at the state and federal level. We still have to consider that in our plan and synopsis, planning type things. So we can't just get rid of policies related to that, because PSC is the provider and we have infrastructure for that. So we still always have to work with and consider those kind of things, even if we have a kind of forward-looking goals related around that. We also have just some, and related to that too, we have a new policy on electrical grid reliability. We also updated a lot of our solid waste policies that kind of reflect our city's contract on that. And there was also some hazardous liquid pipeline policies that were updated to ensure consistency with current practices. So a lot of words there, but those on those 2 elements, but I'm gonna hand it over to Audra to talk about her element.
Hi, good evening, commissioners. So The participation, implementation, and evaluation update for this chapter, we consolidated a lot of the policies from 27 to 25, and this includes 4 new policies. So we tried to really simplify because it was very verbose in some places. We removed the non-inclusive language that was included here, like terms such as citizen were removed, and we used terms like resident or community member. We emphasize supporting effective and equitable participation too, and the new policies that are included in this chapter are incorporating historically excluded communities into the planning process, adding policies to encourage tribal participation, streamlining the development review process, and also establishing some equity impact review tools. Those are the main changes from the 2030 to the 2050 comp plan. And we can go to the last slide, Glenn. This is just the changes that were done for the last draft. So we're going to be back, Planning Commission, in April 24th for a new session, a study session, and also looking for a recommendation. And then back on May 8th for the PC report approval. And then these 3 chapters are coming to City Council during the second quarter and third quarter of 2024. And I think that's it for these 3 chapters.
Great, thank you. So in that case, if there aren't any commissioner questions up front, oh, there's one. Commissioner Copley.
2 questions. There's a section that indicates that we'll reassess the land use element if probable funding falls short of meeting existing needs. What would flag probable capital facilities funding shortfall?
For example, a major recession that might trigger, say, like a lack of revenue to actually support that infrastructure. That's one example. Generally, it's that. It's a lack of revenue, either forecast or whatever. And, you know, there's a lot of different variables on that. But generally, it's usually be kind of recession related. Also, pandemic had a kind of an impact on our city's budget just related to that because it kind of created you know, a mini recession. Maybe that might be not the correct economic type term, but basically it created a shortfall in our city's budget. So we had to kind of scale back some of our CIP, which is kind of our project planning. Those are examples of that, but at the same time, those were pretty short term, so it didn't actually trigger like that we actually had to go back and change, say, our land use map or zoning maps. But that would be kind of an extreme example that, you know, we project such a massive shortfall in the next 5-10 years that, you know, that there would be no way to pay for this infrastructure related to growth. That being said, there most likely wouldn't be growth if there was a recession. So they're kind of hand in hand or kind of, you know, self-fulfilling, so.
Thank you. And the second question was, you mentioned scope creep for capital facilities. Would future investments in renewable energy fall under capital facilities, for example, solar rooftops on buildings?
So we include that in our capital investment, our budget for a capital improvement plan. Yes and no, because it's not a building, but they are improvements, and it is something that we do note. Like you'll see in the park plan, like I think, you know, add like EV infrastructure. That is something like we're doing for the city garage, and that's like a specific project that we have. Yeah. Okay, it's ambiguous because it creates energy, so it kind of almost ties into utilities, but I was curious. And that's where it could also fall under our, well, I see where you're getting at. The utilities really relates to our relationship with agencies, whereas what you're noting is a city-owned project that would help us meet our climate planning goals, and yes, would probably help on our electricity bill as a city government. But the utilities element really talks about our relationship, say, with Puget Sound Energy and how that's works. So,
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we'll come back. We'll have more time later, so if you think of anything. For the moment, then I'm going to open the public hearing. And back to Glenn for comments.
we have two speakers. The first is David Morton.
Good evening, Commissioners. David Morton, Redmond 98053. In the vision statement of the utilities element, it stated that in 2050, the City of Redmond has worked with and supported energy providers as well as partners locally, regionally, and federally to transition to 100% renewable energy, including the phase-out of natural gas. Also, the sentence that immediately precedes policy UT 60 says, as part of its climate goals to phase out fossil fuels and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, as well as for the health and safety reasons, the City of Redmond is committed to phasing out the use of natural gas as an energy source. This is followed by UT 60, the utility element policy on natural gas energy and facilities. Quote, move away from natural gas as an energy source while ensuring that existing natural gas facilities are maintained and improved for safety and efficiency. So if Redmond has in fact transitioned to 100% renewable energy and phased out the use of natural gas as an energy source by 2050, why will natural gas facilities still even exist within Redmond? It seems there may be some inconsistency or lack of clarity in the proposed utilities element of Redmond's comprehensive plan. The vision statement sets a goal of transitioning to 100% renewable energy and phasing out natural gas by 2050. However, the policy UT 60 suggests that existing natural gas facilities should be maintained and improved for safety and efficiency. This apparent contradiction could be due to several reasons. First, transition period. It's possible that the transition to 100% renewable energy will take time, and during this transition period, existing natural gas facilities may still be needed to provide energy to the city. Even though the goal is to phase out natural gas, it may not be feasible to do so immediately, and maintaining these facilities temporarily could be a pragmatic approach. Second, backup or redundancy. Natural gas facilities may serve as backup or redundancy for renewable energy sources, particularly during times when renewable sources are not sufficient to meet the city's energy needs. In this case, while the primary focus is on renewable energy, natural gas facilities may still have a role to play in ensuring energy reliability. Third, infrastructure conversion. Converting existing natural gas infrastructure to accommodate renewable energy sources may be a complex and costly process. Therefore, it's possible that some natural gas facilities will remain in place even after the transition to renewable energy, either because they have been repurposed for other uses or because they are still operational for specific purposes. And fourth, industrial or commercial needs. Certain industries or commercial entities within Redmond may still require natural gas for their operations, even if the rest of the city has transitioned to renewable energy. In such cases, natural gas facilities may continue to exist to meet these specific needs. In any case, it would be advisable for the city to clarify and reconcile these points within the utilities element to ensure consistency and transparency in its planning process. This may involve further discussions with stakeholders, feasibility studies, and updates to the policy language to accurately reflect the city's goals and strategies regarding natural gas usage and infrastructure. Thank you.
Next speaker is Devin Kellogg.
Good evening, Planning Commissioners and staff. My name is Devin Kellogg, parent, preschool teacher, and stable climate advocate living on Education Hill. I'm testifying today on the utilities element, specifically the items related to methane, aka natural gas. I'm thrilled to see policy language moving us away from gas in UT 60. It's a good start, but I have a few suggestions for improvement. As we've recently come to learn, methane is toxic, explosive, and a ticking climate time bomb. Experts are saying we are at a critical inflection point and that rapidly reducing the toxic methane pollution, the primary component of natural gas, is the key to navigating our way out. Probably why we have 180 on policy. According to the Washington Department of Commerce, the greatest portion of the building sector heat trapping emissions come from the direct combustion of natural gas and other fossil fuels in buildings. Further, the 2021 State Energy Strategy recommends building electrification as the least cost pathway to decarbonizing Washington's building stock. Climate-friendly options such as heat pumps are not only cleaner, safer, and more efficient, they also provide cooling, which is a lifesaver, and are now typical summer heat waves. Therefore, I ask that the language in UT 60 be strengthened to make sure it's clear we're not just talking about moving away from natural gas as an energy source, but also from fuel-based consumption equipment in our homes and buildings to electric options, and to include specific timelines and targets in line with the local and statewide goals. Including these targets would also help clear up some of the ambiguity issues raised by Dr. Morton and others. Additionally, according to the Washington State 2023 Residential Building Decarbonization Plan, whole home electrification will be necessary in 95% of existing buildings in 2050 to achieve the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals. An expensive and daunting task, which is why they also recommend all electric new construction statewide no later than 2027 code cycle. We really don't have time to nibble around the edges on this. If it's truly our intention to meet these critical and ambitious timelines, save residents costly upgrades, and minimize stranded assets, new gas line buildup must stop. Cities have some jurisdiction here, so I ask that language be added to preclude any new gas infrastructure from being incentivized or subsidized or permitted to be expanded in our public rights of way. Finally, considering the extensive health and safety risks associated with the toxic combustible gases in our homes and buildings and distribution lines, plus the fact that we live in a seismically active area, I ask for UT 69 to be expanded to include assessments and planning for these risks as well. Let's be bold in our vision, clear in our intentions, and work to protect the health, safety, and future of our residents and families. I've included proposed language and reference links in my written testimony. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
And that is it for speakers.
All right. So in that case, we're going to close the verbal portion of the public hearing. And I believe written testimony will stay open.
We would recommend to the next meeting.
All right, so we'll keep that open for now. All right, so, but closing the verbal portion of the public hearing. All right, Glenn, study session.
All right. We have a couple outstanding issues, so let me pull that up first, and then we can open it up. Let's see. All right. So the first outstanding issue was under the capital facilities element, and this was actually Commissioner Aparna's issue related to levels of service standards. We've kind of noted what that actually means, and I know she had a kind of additional question on that at the last meeting, and we just provided a little bit more clarity, hopefully, kind of what that is, say, in our regional plan and our, what King County has. You can note, they're very generalized type policies, and I would go back, if there's still questions on what level service standards mean, the initial response kind of provides that answer, but this provides a little bit more context at the county and regional level. But, you know, we can close this next time a partner's here.
Right, yeah, I think we'll keep it open until she's here to close it, but thank you for the additional detail.
Okay. Other outstanding issue was under the utilities element, 9D. So, get to it. This is also Commissioner Aparna's issue, but just want to note for the record, she had an additional question on this UT 24, and we just want to note that staff did go back and look at that policy, and some of the numbers changed. It was a B. Yeah, anyway, the policy numbers changed, so we apologize, you know, as we move stuff, but we did, but it was related to the wellhead protection program, and staff made a change to address her comment there, so, yeah.
Great. All right, so do any commissioners have new things to add for the capital facilities, utilities, or participation, implementation, and
I was going to say, I think
evaluation
Audra has
elements?
one comment.
Oh, sorry about that, Audra.
It's okay. I just wanted to note that there's one issue open from Commissioner Aparna for the participation, implementation, and evaluation chapter. And it was just adding some clarification on the language and adding it in there. But we can keep it open until she's back.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
All right, Commissioner Coleman.
Thank you, Glenn. And Audra, I had two questions. So one is a broader question, one's a specific question on one of the policy languages. So let me just bear with me for a second because I want to actually see if I can ask this the right way. So when we're thinking about electrical usage within the city for capital and just utilities as well, how are we thinking about the estimation of growth for use of electric, both in terms of the expansion of facilities for housing, etc., in addition to the fact that electric is, so I'm going to use a Bob Dylan went electric, right? Everyone's going electric. And how do we think about the usage of electricity and our ability to deliver that in an effective, safe, and sustainable way to residents and to businesses and, to the what we need to do from a facilities perspective?
So one thing to first note, as a city related to the Growth Management Act, our job really is to accommodate a certain amount of population and job growth. And that's through land use policies and zoning code. In terms of the provision of utilities, ultimately, it's provided by a private company that's regulated by the state and also the federal government. So it's, to kind of say it in kind of layperson's terms, they have to kind of assess what all the growth is in the region themselves. They're working with King County, PSRC, the state of Washington, and they kind of have to determine, okay, Redmond, Kirkland, the east side, there's a lot of growth going on. What projects do we need to do to accommodate that? And there's required energy plans that PSC is required to do. Kathy, I think Kathy Beam, who was just talking, she had kind of noted Energize East Side. That was a big major project for, I think, the last 8 years that Puget Sound Energy did. All the communities worked closely with, and that included major upgrades to substations, updated a lot of our power lines from like 120 to 240, things like that. But what that did was in consideration of the growth that's going on in the east side. They have a report that kind of lists their projects going out 10, 15 years. We review that, staff works with them on that, and it's kind of an iterative process. But yeah. I think Becky wants to.
Yeah, I'd just like to add in a little bit about how the Growth Management Act considers that from a sequencing standpoint. Okay, so the state assigns the growth down and then to the region and counties, and then it goes down to the cities. And then we have to figure out where it's going to go, right? So that all has to happen. But then the utility providers aren't necessarily within one particular city either, right? So they need everybody to figure out where it's all going to go so that they can then go through their own master planning process. So from a sequencing standpoint, the state has said, we're going to require you to do this. You guys figure out how you're going to accommodate it. Then you utility providers go back and see what they adopt, and you update your master plans to accommodate what we're required to accommodate, right? So there's a sequence of you have to do, and we have to finish our piece first, and all of the cities around us have to finish their work too, so that then the utility providers can go in and say, okay, Bellevue's doing this, Kirkland's doing this, Redmond, Sammamish. Okay, now that I see the whole big picture, and now I can work at a regional level and then go through and update my plan. But my plan has to match their adopted plan. Legally, that's how the state has set it up. So is that helpful?
It is. I still have that question, like, how are we estimating electrical power usage in 2050 given all of that?
How the utility estimates that? Is that what you're asking?
Consumption of electricity and our delivery of that.
I would, I think that's a question beyond the scope of our staff, but I would say that kind of what Becky had mentioned, they would look at the population. They have formulas based on the growth patterns of demand. Really, it's demand. That they're looking at what the future demand is, and they're using these growth numbers for both jobs and development and residential. And there's metrics behind like population numbers and things like that. But they're also taking in, there's also other bigger considerations, like there's new state laws like to phase out the dirtier type sources. So they also have to look where they're gonna get their energy sources from. And like now there's requirements for like to try to get to 100% clean energy and things like that. So there's a lot of different variables. That's the short, simple answer. There's many, many variables, but ultimately they have to look at what the future peak is. And of course, these get reevaluated every 5-10 years or so. And that's really gets back to what the intention of the utilities element is again, is that's really providing us that direction that we need to work with Puget Sound Energy and look at their plan and kind of have this kind of ongoing process of constantly evaluating and determining, say, where infrastructure needs to go and vice versa.
So thank you. Just my last thing here is, am I hearing you saying like in the plans, there's flexibility based on, in these plans in terms of the utilities? So what I'm trying to ask is like, if we put utilities in place, and demand is higher than we expected, how do we then readapt for that? Because that's kind of the primary question in many respects.
I was going to, my colleague Tim has some context. I think he might be able to provide that. Hopefully, can answer your question maybe a little bit better. Oh, Tim, you're muted.
There we go. Yeah, here. My name is Tim McCarg. I'm a principal planner. I worked in a former life for a jurisdiction that was very involved with Puget Sound Energy's Energized East Side project. And what I will say is that because utilities are such heavily regulated industries, that's a very complicated question to answer. Basically, every utility, electrical utility in the state is required to forecast demand and develop a plan to meet that demand. And those plans are brought before the Washington State Utilities and Transportation Commission, which is an entity within the Washington state government that regulates not just electrical utilities, but other utilities, things like trucking and other taxis, other heavily regulated industries. So the way that the process works is that utility providers are required to develop demand forecasts and then present plans to the utilities and Transportation Commission at the state, who then approves those plans, and then they can propose specific projects. And basically, there's a complicated formula that involves what they can charge to ratepayers and what their return on investment is going to be for those projects. But all of that happens kind of at a significant arm's length from the city of Redmond, or any other city that does not own its electrical utility. So I don't know if that helps illuminate some light, but unlike Seattle, which has its own electrical utility, City Light, and the city therefore can be much more involved in kind of large-scale policy issues associated with electrical generation, storage, things of that nature. PSE is a private entity operating under the purview of the Utilities and Transportation Commission at the state level.
Yeah, that's helpful. Becky was going to say.
I would like to add, too, that one of the things that we did when we were developing and modeling our preferred alternative is we broke down the data into little microspaces and then broke it down and even further. So the school district needed things in single family, multifamily, and then other agencies or even our housing, affordable housing, we had to do it, break it into 5 different housing types, right? So, and then we had to break it down to different types of jobs because the transportation modeling needed it. And so all of the data that went into the preferred alternative, we were considering the data needs of all of the other pieces and parts. And so the preferred alternative, we've data modeled it in nuances so that we can be handed off to utility providers, school districts, and other folks that need our data to then update their plans. And so we work really closely with them. If somebody comes back and says, hey, on the water and sewer stuff, I need X, Y, and Z. Well, then we went back to them and said, okay, this is how the preferred alternative breaks that down. And so we work with them to make sure that they have our data in a format that works for their modeling. So is that helpful?
It is. Thank you for that. That was it. I do have one other question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So UT 61, which I think is on, I don't know what page this is on. Hold on a second, of course my computer just went out. UT 61 says, negotiate mutually beneficial franchise contract conditions that support the delivery of cost-effective services designed by Redmond residents and businesses, including to require undergrounding when above-ground electrical facilities are abandoned. Whew, that's a mouthful. The reason that I bring it up for 2 reasons. One is I don't quite understand what mutually beneficial means. Mutually beneficial to whom, because of what? That's one. Maybe I give you my 3 questions if that's okay. Maybe that's.
Perhaps we could bring up UT 61. So we'll just wait a second so everyone can see your point.
Thank you. There we go. So there's some of the language which was confusing. One was mutually beneficial. The second was just on that, and there's another point I want to make as well, but it's after this. At the back end, I don't quite understand, including to require undergrounding when above-ground electrical facilities are abandoned. Abandoned in what circumstance, and how do we think about that? We're going to put it underground when things are abandoned. Where are we abandoning things, or how does that work?
So it's if you look around Redmond or any other city, traditionally in the United States, in most locations, electrical facility, transmission and distribution facilities have been constructed above ground. But a lot of cities, including Redmond, have because that has all kinds of different effects, aesthetic effects, reliability effects during things like windstorms and inclement weather. A lot of cities have pivoted and have required, as part of a franchise agreement with an electrical utility, to require that when sections of either transmission or distribution, primarily distribution facilities for electric, are rebuilt, that they go underground. So, for example, if we've got an area of Redmond, and let's say there's a 20-acre parcel, just a hypothetical, and it's got a couple street frontages. Well, when that parcel comes in and proposes a subdivision, what's going to be required is that the developer of that subdivision take the existing above ground electrical distribution system, abandon that, remove it, and reconstruct it below ground in conduit. And so it goes literally development by development, typically is how that happens. It's not as if there's a large scale project by PSE or others to take entire neighborhoods of the city and underground and their existing electrical infrastructure and remove the above ground stuff. So it happens kind of in an incremental fashion as development proceeds through the city.
And I would also add UT 61 specifically is related to telecommunications. So it's saying that as we're doing that process, we'll also put in the telecommunications, fiber optic and things like that, also in the same conduits underground.
Okay, so it's sort of both.
Yeah, so
both
everything is
utilities.
underground. So, as we're moving the power lines underground, we're not also still having telephone lines. Everything is going underground at the same time, and that's what that policy gets at. And it's kind of a technical policy, and it uses technical jargon, but that's the direction it gives staff and like franchise providers and developers that understand and that we're supposed to do that.
Yeah, to Tim's point, I was kind of shocked when I came to America because I come from the UK, and I'm like, what are these electrical lines up above the ground? What's going on? To live in a part of a neighborhood where it's all above, and there's a bunch which are like very close to us, which are underground. I was a bit confused by that. But the language, just going back to this, the language was a little confusing to me. I think you've explained it, but I think for any other person reading it, they would be a bit confused. I'm not quite sure how to adjust it, but it doesn't make it quite as clear because the abandoned for what reason seems to be something which is
and this is really a technical again that's really related to like meeting legal requirements, and really it's for staff and kind of franchise providers that will understand exactly what that means.
So this is a vocab word that refers to a known process, like with the utility.
Correct.
I'd like to suggest, I can see where the confusion is coming. I think we can look at it internally to see if there's a way that we could rephrase the sentence so that it gets rid of the casual reading confusion and still keeps the technical language in place.
That was it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. Thanks, Tim.
Sure.
Anybody else? All right, that's looking good. So I think we're good on this for now, and then this comes back in 2 meetings, is that correct?
Yeah, we'll be back in 2 weeks.
Oh, in 2 weeks.
And then at that point, we'll be looking for a recommendation on all 3 of these chapters.
Great.
Yep.
Okay, so then our final piece for tonight is our study session on the residential regulations for Redmond 2050. And so that is Audra Cardenas, Tim McHarg, possibly Ian Lefcourt. Not tonight. All right, I will turn it over to the 2 of you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
we're down to the Tim and Audra show tonight, mostly the Audra show.
We're gonna just pick up where we left off for the residential regulations. Let me go. The agenda for tonight. Sorry. Audra Cardenas, Senior Planner for Long Range Planning, and also here is Tim McHarg to help us out with some questions or comments that you have. So the agenda for tonight, we are clarifying the ask that we have for Planning Commission. We'll do a brief introduction on this topic. Then we'll go over some concepts that were raised at the last study session, stuff like dwelling unit definition, the residential size for single family. We did a little bit more of analysis and go over the timeline, and then we can go back to the issues matrix. So the ask tonight for Plan Commission is to continue discussing the topic and also close out any issues that are still outstanding. And if commissioners feel that we can conclude the discussion, then make a recommendation. So what are we looking at here? The residential zoning districts, we are consolidating all the residential zones into two, which are neighborhood residential and neighborhood multifamily. Neighborhood residential consolidates R1 through R8 into one, and also it implements middle housing, which complies with state law, and also implements our housing action plan. And neighborhood multifamily consolidates R12 through R30, and it's similar to what R30 is today. So some concepts that were brought up at the last study session was like what is considered a dwelling unit. So here we're looking at the definition on what a dwelling unit is. So basically it's a single unit providing complete independent living facilities, and it has provisions for living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. So I think this was brought up by the commission on what would be like the minimal size. And we don't really have like a minimum, like a number. It's more that it has to include all these provisions. And we included also the IBC definition, which is very similar to the one we have in the Redmond zoning code. Then something that came up also was there was some discussion on the 4,500 square feet for single family, and if that was too big or too small. So we did a little bit more of data analysis. We went into the King County assessor's data, and we downloaded what the total living square feet for one dwelling unit, so single family units. And here you can see how it is distributed. It's around 12,000 records. So you see here that we are basically just limiting the highest and the high end on the sizes. So it's not, it's one of the tools to implement middle housing, but it's not the only one. And I hope some of this data can help in the discussion to see if you want to lower the number, keep it as is, or yeah, any other alternatives. And also something that came up was a little bit of confusion on what we were considering for total structures, total size of the structures. So we here we have additional red lines that could come into the Planning Commission recommendation, and it's to add the gross floor area into this table, which we do have a definition in the Redmond zoning code, which refers to the area included within the surrounding exterior walls of a building or portion thereof, exclusive of vent shafts, elevator shafts, stairwells, courts, second-story atriums, and lobbies. So this does include the, we're going to be including the garages, but we are not going to be including any area below grade. So I hope this also clarifies some of the discussion that we had last time. And let's see. And the timeline for this study session today, if you want to do a recommendation, that would be, if you can close all the issues, there's some more discussion, we could do a possible recommendation. If not, we're going to be back on April 24th for maybe a possible recommendation then. So now we can go, I don't know if there are any questions, issues, or you want to explore right now before we jump into the issues matrix.
I think let's jump into the matrix. One thing I just want to note for new commissioners, this has been a lively topic of conversation. And the matrix looks pretty sparse, but that doesn't, to me, actively, like really characterize how much movement there still seems to be as of last meeting. So we're kind of coming into this, we've had a break, we have more information in the presentation, we're coming in with fresh eyes and new commissioners present. With a goal of trying to move forward. I don't know if we'll actually finish tonight or if we'll have one more study session to go, but let's go through the issues matrix and then we can do a jumping off point into new questions and new thoughts.
So the first one, and I think these 4 and 5 are related, is regarding the development capacity into irregular lots and also related to parking. And I don't know if you have any questions on this or you want to close them out or have a bigger discussion with the commissioners.
Sure. So this one's mine. So I'll just jump in on my thinking on it because I've been going back and forth a lot on this. my biggest concern here, I think we've answered a lot of the specific, like emergency access versions of the parking. I think we've answered a lot of how the site constraints can help in situations like the kite-shaped lots and the weird-shaped lots and all the cul-de-sacs and all that. The piece I still keep coming back to is parking. Redmond, a lot of where we are considering, or kind of looking forward, where this would be applied to infill development, is just, it is not pedestrian friendly. So you cannot get to a store easily without a car. You cannot get your kids to school easily without a car. There's an amazing new site that was just published this week. It was covered in the Seattle Times that shows like walk shed areas for different types of amenities. In my particular neighborhood, Grasshon Park, almost nothing counts as walkable to anything. You really need a car, especially if you have a family, and that is sort of family-centric housing. So my proposal to close this would be, and I'm saying this noting that I would love over time for us to get to the point where people can live in those neighborhoods without a car. I just don't think it's realistic today. Like, my option for a grocery store from that neighborhood would be to take a bus to Crossroads in Bellevue. That's my nearest busable grocery store. And thus, there's more density and the bus lines change. So I just, for the time being, I would like to really see that each unit, like housing unit in the infill development, has one parking spot, as opposed to the current proposal, which is that ADUs would not require a parking spot. These roads were not built for street parking to really be a safe option, like much more than they are now, and I don't like it. It's just playing with the numbers. I think that we should expect that people will have a car, and then they'll need something to do with it.
Just to jump in here, I think parking provisions were already came to the Planning Commission as part of the transportation package, so they're already have been recommended by the Planning Commission, and I just wanted to highlight that the no parking requirement for ADUs has already been brought to the Planning Commission before. So just to put it out there, I think it's in the table is in the matrix in number 5 here. So this is what came to the Planning Commission when the transportation element was recommended.
Correct. And that table still lists 0 as an acceptable parking amount for ADUs. The minimum and maximum goes to 0 on a lot of those parking types.
Yes. Yeah, I just want to highlight that this has already been brought up and it was accepted by the Planning Commission.
Absolutely. And my point is that in those, in the infill developments in kite-shaped lots, as an example, on the streets that are just like mazes of cul-de-sacs, I don't think it's reasonable to sign off ahead of time on 0 parking spots for infill development, because there isn't somewhere else for people to park in many cases. The parking made sense when we're talking about like previous versions of subdividing. We're talking about adding a lot more density now. And I want to make sure that parking keeps up with it for the time being until we have enough density that there are more options available for people to move around the city. Commissioner Coleman.
Thank you. Just a question. I'm curious about whether we put some time limit on something like that that's dependent on when transportation is then available. So it's not just an open-ended sort of approach. I don't mean that in a bad way. Just like, should we put something in there that's a time limit? Like this should be reassessed at in 2040 or 2035.
So you wouldn't usually put that in the zoning code, but if either Audra or Tim, you have suggestions on how to, because that is a big part of what I'm saying, is that there should be a time limit. This should be revisited. It's just in terms of the regulations that would go into place in a year and a half, that we would potentially not want to say that no parking is an option.
Yeah, just to be clear, I agree with what you're saying about short term. Questions like how short is short term, right?
Yeah.
So I guess my perspective on that, a couple things. One is I anticipate that, these regulations will be revisited probably in 3 to 4 years to see how we're doing, and whether that drives, that'll be done at a staff level, because I think we're all, quite frankly, eager to see, what comes out of these amendments and reducing the barriers to middle housing. And whether or not the changes that we're making are going to be effective. So I think that's, if the Planning Commission wants to, say, for example, advance some type of specific regulation that, well, not a specific regulation, or as part of your recommendation that these middle housing regulations be assessed, no later than 5 years after or effectiveness, I think that that's fine. And I would actually support that. Because I think, we haven't done this before, right? We're using the best available information that we have, but no one can predict how, economic conditions are going to either are going to interact with these regulations and produce outcomes that we didn't foresee, or, perhaps really nothing happens. And so we need to understand why nothing has happened, because I think we want this to happen.
Right.
So that's, I think, the first point. The second point is, every parking space that is required as part of this is, and this is just the way that development regulations work, is that it's squeezing a balloon. Right, so we have defined now what the balloon is on any given lot in this zone. If we require parking spaces, that is going to inherently reduce the amount of, it's going to do one of two things, actually. It's either going to reduce the amount of middle housing that is produced, and or it will make each individual unit of middle housing more expensive, because someone has to pay the cost, first of all, for providing that, either in a garage or in a surface space. And then that garage or surface space consumes area of the lot that would otherwise be developable for a middle housing unit. And so it may not cost each and every lot a middle housing unit, but overall, aggregating all lots that will be redeveloped for middle housing, this will reduce the number of units and increase the cost. And if that's, I just want to put that out there. I'm not, if you feel like this is imperative, then I understand that. My feeling, quite frankly, is that the market is probably going to produce parking stalls for these units anyway, but that's just my personal opinion based upon kind of where these things are going to be happening and the target markets for middle housing units. So, but there's all I'm trying to say is that this bill was enacted by the legislature because cities, quite frankly, refused to take a hard look at their regulations and understand where they were enacting barriers to creating this type of housing. And so I think we have taken a very comprehensive look at all of those barriers. Parking, we believe, is one of them. And so there's effects from these regulations. And so I just want to put that out there for a discussion by the commission at this point. And I see another commissioner has her hand raised, and so I'll pipe down.
Okay. Denise, 1 second, or sorry, Commissioner Gagne, 1 second, and then I just want to let Becky chime in.
I was just going to suggest a path forward. Within your Planning Commission report, you can include in that recommendation that we would reevaluate in 5 years. That is something that we have as a part of a number of other pieces that we're moving forward that are brand new. So you could just, when you direct staff to prepare your Planning Commission recommendation, you could have them add that into the report.
Thank you. All right, Commissioner Gagne.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question to Tim. When you said that the market will produce parking spots, I'm brand new. I don't know what that means. Can you provide clarity on what you meant by that?
I'm sorry, one second. We're having, your volume is very low here. We're having a hard time hearing. I don't know if it's possible to speak up or if that's something we can fix on our end.
I will try to talk much louder. I'm sorry. Tim, when you said during your comment earlier that the market will produce parking spots, can you help me understand what you meant by that? And now you're
Tim,
on
you're
mute.
muted.
Tim.
Well, no one can hear what I'm saying, so should I reiterate the question, paraphrase the
That
question
would be
for
lovely.
everyone's
Thank you.
benefit? Yeah, so Commissioner Gagne is asking a question for me to kind of unpack what I meant by the market will produce parking spaces for these middle housing developments. Is that a fair paraphrase? So what I mean by that, and sorry, apologies for the kind of cryptic nature of the comment, but what we see in Redmond and what you see in most cities, even in much more dense urban areas that are actually fairly well served by public transportation, most residential projects actually build parking when parking isn't required. And part of that, well, there's a lot of reasons for that. It primarily goes to marketability of those units. And so a developer is going to want to cast the widest net possible, typically, for their residential product that they're bringing to market. If they don't provide parking spaces, regardless of the type of environment, typically they're very much so limiting the target market that are going to be interested in buying those units. And so, for example, even in downtown Overlake, projects that I'm working on within walking distance of the light rail stations are not just providing parking, they're providing parking that exceeds the minimum parking requirements. And so I think that is an indicator or an example of the fact that I think a lot of developers feel like they cannot adequately market and therefore price their product where they want to if they don't provide some type of parking on site, because the reality is that most Americans have a car. And I think the reality is, for these projects, middle housing projects that are in existing neighborhoods that don't have great transit service, that don't have multimodal transportation options, people are going to drive, and so they will provide a parking space. Otherwise, you're trying to market, a $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 unit to someone who's going to have to park on the street, and I think that's a tough sell in a market such as Redmond that's kind of transitioning from suburb to city.
If I can jump in, I really agree with your evaluation from a developer perspective. The place that I think it kind of breaks down, though, is there are a lot of individual property owners in Redmond who will be freed up to create middle housing of assorted kinds, like whether it's like an in-law unit in their own home for their own family, or whether it's rentals in their backyard, and they are not necessarily incented at all to figure out the parking situation, because it is so hard to find rental housing, especially if you are tied to a particular school for your children or other situations. So that is a situation that I'm already seeing on my street and in my neighborhood before this goes into effect. So I think this is going to become even more of a squeeze, just because it is so expensive for people to live here that they're willing to make trade-offs, such as not having a parking spot, but then it really causes a lot more pressure on the street parking in neighborhoods that weren't designed for it, frankly. So it's just, there's a balance here. I completely hear what you're saying about developers, but I think a lot of the interest that I'm hearing in this middle housing moving forward is actually from property owners who are just like, they feel like it is a tight situation financially and this could ease up. And I just want to make sure that we're kind of like preserving some of this road safety that's an advantage. These aren't well-designed streets. Like cul-de-sacs are not what anyone would want going forward.
I
but
disagree.
It's what we
Those
have.
streets are very well designed. They're designed for automobiles.
Exactly.
They're not designed for pedestrians. And
Right.
so I guess, you know, I'm not arguing. I just want to turn maybe the other side of that coin. Those streets they're probably 40 feet wide, curb to curb. Right?
But they're not. Yeah.
Two 12-foot travel lanes and two 8-foot parallel parking stalls on either side, 40 feet curb to
But
curb.
it's not like somewhere like Seattle that's on a grid. These are curvy.
Exactly, and so
difficult.
the speed of travel is lower because you're not connected to a grid, and there's more parking because the lots are larger and therefore less curb cuts. So, in my opinion, and we can agree to disagree. I just am saying from my perspective as a planner, I think that that is a situation where there's plenty of on-street parking to accommodate things, as opposed to Seattle, where you've got a lot higher density, a lot smaller lots, a lot more curb cuts, and therefore a lot less on-street parking. So, and it may be a situation, quite frankly, where, you know, if we're talking about what we do in an evaluation in five years in the future, you know, we may need to look at a residential parking program. You know, where if you live in a neighborhood, you have to get a zone 5 or zone 4, depending on the neighborhood, parking pass to be able to park on the street legally. I mean, that may be the direction that we go to try to address, I think, some of the parking issues that you are correctly foreseeing. It's a change, but I guess I don't see cars being parked on a public street as being something that is detrimental to traffic safety.
Oh, not to traffic safety, to pedestrian
Mm-hmm.
safety, to bike safety. And I don't think there's
either.
actually as much available parking as you're suggesting.
Tim
Okay.
and Commissioner Weston, could I suggest a study where we could try to determine what the increased cost per unit of housing would be if we required these ADUs or middle housing units to provide parking?
I think with the time pressure that we're under, that's probably going to be difficult at this point, because we are trying to implement the state law that was passed.
My concern would be that the additional cost would be passed through to either renters or owners of those units. And so that's my chief concern.
So I just want to jump in here really quick and try to get us to a conclusion for this item so we can move on to some of the others. The parking regulations, as Audra mentioned earlier, are already at the council for approval for this cycle. What we can do is we can put a recommendation for a reevaluation in the future, and so that we can go ahead and move this forward and not get stuck on this particular item, because that parking regulation is not in this package. So just to be very clear, that regulation is not what is in front of you and what you're voting on today. What you're voting on today is actually the other piece of it.
Can you clarify that, please?
So the actual parking regulations are in the transportation package that the Planning Commission has already recommended to City Council. And so that piece of it has actually been moved past the Planning Commission as a committee. And so what we're looking at today and what is in front of you today is the recommendation for the actual residential zone itself, not the parking for that, because that is in a different section of code. And so I just want to make that clear, that what we can do in the Planning Commission recommendation is say, hey, we recognize that there are other pieces and parts, and we do want to take a look at it. But if we get stuck on this item that's not actually a part of this package, it can slow this package when that piece is actually beyond the Planning Commission already.
Wait, so can I clarify? There is no parking in the residential zoning code?
No, it's actually in the parking code now. So one of the things that we did in Redmond 2050 is all the parking regulations from each of the zoning district now is going to be moved into the parking section of code. All the landscaping is pulling out of each of the zoning districts and going to landscaping. Open space, the same thing. So all parking regulations are now in the parking regulation of code, and that has already been through the Planning Commission. So within each individual zoning district, we do not have any parking regulations within that zone. It's actually in that other section of code.
Okay. Yeah, a reevaluation period would definitely make sense. The one thing that then this also brings in is, does it make sense then to be including things like garages in our square footage when we're talking about lot coverage and all of those pieces? Because then that makes it seem like it's being regulated in this section.
That's a good question, and we could put that on ODRA's issues matrix, and we can reevaluate that for the next meeting if we want to
That'd be
move
great.
on to the next item.
Yeah, but there's no requirement to provide parking in a garage. It can be a surface spot. And so, I don't, the reason that we've included all of the square footage is that, after discussion from the last Planning Commission meeting, what we're trying to get out with these sizes of houses and units is actually a mass and scale issue. And so things that are below underground do not read as mass or scale because you can't see them. Garage, even though people don't live in there, at least initially, cars live in there. It still creates mass and still creates scale and still chews up things like, lot coverage, impervious surface area. And so that's why, we've clarified that all square footage, all above ground square footage, regardless of what is inside that space, counts towards that maximum number in terms of gross floor area.
Other comments on this item?
On this particular point,
Yep.
I was a bit, just a question on the below ground piece. And I'm just going to give you an example. So in London, there's some big issues in London with people who've got a ton of money building subterranean, down to the earth's core almost building. Sorry, I'm being obtuse to make a point. So is there any regulation about how far down someone can go in their house? Like, because you could potentially, in the future, build something that creates a lot of space for other people. I'm just wondering, have we thought about that? I'm just because I've seen that be an issue in cities.
I think we got a long way to go for the economics of that to work in Redmond, quite honestly. But yeah, you would have, that's an engineering building code issue in terms of what's habitable below grade. Because even though you may have, let's say a second house below grade, you still have to meet all the egress requirements, which is going to be challenging for a large structure that's below grade because you're only going to have a limited amount of egress routes in and out, right? So let's say something catches on fire down there, or, the plumbing breaks or whatever, you need to get people safely out of that underground space. And so you'll need to meet all of those egress requirements, and that can become very, very challenging with a large scale below grade type of structure.
What we do have is in our critical aquifer recharge area, one of the code updates that we're in the middle of doing is minimizing and eliminating opportunities to dewater for construction purposes. So that is a limitation then in that case. So it's a couple of yes and no's and maybes and ands.
Sorry, I realized I wasn't totally clear. Does anyone have any other things to add on this one? The kites and the parking and the everything. I was seeing eyebrows, but if everyone's happy, then I think we can close, and then we'll leave the question of the parking garage issue for a separate new item.
Okay, I'll add it to the matrix. And the other item that was open is number 12. And let me know if you can see this, or I can zoom in. and it was about the size limit, the gross floor area limit on single family units, which we had put here at 4,500 square foot. And I know commissioners wanted more information, and that's why we went into the assessor's data. So I don't know if you want to close this out or just discuss a little bit more. If you want to leave it at it as is, lower it, or other alternatives.
So this one was marked as closed, but I don't think we're closed on it. I think that was
No,
still
I
very
think-
active.
Yeah, because I think it's marked as closed because first we kind of closed it and then Aparna kind of reopened it at the last meeting. So that's why it shows us closed, but it was actually reopened the last meeting.
Great.
So
Yeah,
this
so we'll keep
is
that one open so we can discuss now.
we just
See Commissioner. Sorry, I see Commissioner Gagne has her hand up, and I'm not sure what her
Thank you for
question
the
is
help.
related to. Yeah, before we move on, I just want to make sure that she had a chance to ask her question.
Yes, appreciate
Thank
it.
you so much.
Thank you.
I do have a question on
Sure.
on this issue, and I did try to educate myself. I understand that this has been a very lively discussion, that I'm brand new to it, so I want to be respectful of discussions that happened before me. I watched last week's meeting. I think I have somewhat of a picture of the controversy here, but I'm wondering if we can go back to the slide you shared, Audra, that had the number of houses that this actually impacts.
Yeah, so that bar chart, Audra. Is that the one you're looking for?
Yes, yes.
So
Okay.
this is the, sorry, just to clarify, this is the updated one. We had another one at the last meeting which was just looking at our permits from 2015 to 2024 March. And this is basically permits, data from the assessor. So it's all the city which has single family units, and the data extraction is March 1st of this year. So this includes all the city. So it's a little bit a different chart from what we saw last week, just clarifying that.
Okay. So is there a percentage? I don't have my glasses. We're on spring break and I made the mistake of not packing my glasses, so I can't actually tell the numbers that are on the final.
Oh, yes. Let me see if I can zoom in.
What's the percentage of houses compare percentage of dwellings?
I don't have that number, but I calculated it, and let me just go into my Excel. But it's not a huge number. As you see, it's like 81, higher than 4,500 feet is like 81 plus 42. It's like maybe 150.
For 44, I just did
units.
that calculation out. 4 out of 1,000 is 3.3%.
One moment. Let's not crosstalk. Just a second. We'll let Audra finish and then.
Okay.
Let me just go and look for my Excel sheet, and I can probably calculate those percentages like on the fly. So if you want to discuss while I do that, that's also fine with me.
All right.
I do
Commissioner
have
Coleman.
an additional
One
question,
second.
a follow-up, or is this not the time for that? I'm sorry that I
No,
don't
you may.
understand the procedure yet.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
So I'm trying to grasp that my sense is that the point of capping the square footage is to provide an incentive for middle housing. So my question, once we have that percentage, is if it's only going to impact, for example, 4% of the dwellings, how is this incentivizing middle housing, and what is the trade-off there with,
Yeah, that's a good
Oh,
question.
space and freedom?
Sorry, this is just one of the tools to incentivize middle housing. It's not the only thing that we are looking at. We're just like trying to put a cap on the gross floor area. So it would make more sense as a developer. Okay, I cannot build more than this, so it maybe make sense for me to build more units so I can have that higher threshold of square footage. But it's not the only incentive, right? I mean, it can be market. So it's one of the tools. And here we're trying to just limit the Mac mansions, as you would say in the US. So the bigger, super extreme structures that we have some in there in Redmond, but they're not a lot. So it's just one of the tools. And that was also one of the discussion points that came up. If the commission wanted to lower that number, so that would take away, I mean, for single family homes, you would only be able to do like 3,500 or, so there's been, the discussion is actually the number, if it's okay, or if you want to put it back, higher or lower. That's actually one of the points of the discussion.
Yeah. So, but one of the important things, and it maybe was not discussed at the last meeting. So where this all started is that's an important part for new commissioners to understand. Is we've got a lot of single-family residential zones right now. We've got probably 6 to 8 single-family residential zones. One of the things that we're doing with our code amendments is we're consolidating all of those into a single neighborhood residential zone for single family and middle housing. And so what that means is that we're taking a zone, for example, what is currently called R1. The minimum lot size in R1 is an acre. And then our most dense single family zone currently is R8, which is 8 dwelling units per acre, right? So a much smaller lot. And so our current system of dimensional standards, it goes for a 1 acre lot in R1. You can have for example, the lot coverage is maybe like 30%. So, the lot's bigger, but the lot coverage is smaller, which defines the footprint of the building. So when you squish all of those zones and collapse them together from R1 to R8, what we decided to do was use the R8 dimensional standards. So because the R8 lots are much smaller, we allow for a higher percentage of lot coverage. And so what we don't want to have happen, so let's just hypothetically say that the lot coverage in R8 is 50%. Well, if we consolidate all these zones and use 50% lot coverage, that's going to be a heck of a large building that's going to be allowed on a 1 acre lot, right? It's going to be a half acre building footprint. So part of this exercise is to figure out, okay, we want a single consolidated set of dimensional standards, but now having consolidated all the zones, we need to make sure that there are some caps so that on those 1 acre lots, we don't end up with, a building, a single family residence or other structure with like literally a 22,000 square foot footprint, which is what would happen if we didn't cap this. So that was the genesis of, by applying higher density dimensional standards to very large lots, the concern was we could end up potentially with some very, very large structures. And so we wanted to cap the individual structure size based on that, in addition to trying to incent middle housing typologies. So that maybe that's a roundabout answer. I hope that made sense, but there's a couple different factors that, in terms of the genesis of this maximum individual structure size.
Thank you for all of that explanation. I appreciate it.
Okay.
And I have the percentage of structures that are 4,500 and more and higher or bigger is 3.25%. And if we go from 5,000 square feet and bigger, it's 1.4. So it is not a huge number, but as Tim was saying, explaining the process on how we got to this.
Audra, do you have the info on what would be 4,000 and larger?
The percentage? Yes. Let me just do a little quick sum here. Doing stuff on the fly.
I can tell jokes to fill space if anyone feels that that's appropriate. Yes. Yeah, just to take the pressure off of Audra.
7.83%.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Coleman, do you still have a comment?
Just want to affirm those are the right, yeah, I did a little calculation, thanks, Adrian, I did exactly the same calculation. I was curious because I was looking at the square footage, the bar chart up here is current residences. So if we took, like, what's the percentage? If we're picking, say, 4,500, that's 3.3%, 4,500 and above. What's the rationale for 4.5 versus like 4,000, which would be 7.8%? Like, it feels a little random. The other question is, if we say we shut this off at 4,000, then I think you should correct me if I'm wrong, but no 4,000 square foot single family home would then get built. And so if we looked at this bar chart in 20 years' time, everything would go up on the left-hand side, nothing would change on the right. So how do we think about that that's, I guess, the goal, right? But I just don't know what the numbers are and how we should think about the numbers side of it, percentage-wise, and what that's. So, Tim, I'm not quite sure your thoughts are on that. If that's the right.
Yeah, no, it is. You're right. There's no magic to that number. We didn't try to back it in by saying, okay, let's try and, the 2.5 or 5% largest houses, we want to define the number based on that. It wasn't kind of backing in those numbers in that way. We just, I think, landed on 4,500 as a number, looking at this data and saying that it's a relatively small percentage. I won't say de minimis. It's a small percentage of houses that exist in Redmond, and obviously those houses would be able to continue. I think the idea policy-wise here is to cap those houses. And then we obviously want to be able to accommodate, situations such as different types of households or multi-generational households, different types of household structures. I think our answer to that is, this middle housing in and of itself, allowing this is an opportunity to be able to give those households, those types of households, more options. So you can do 6 ADUs on a lot. You could do, a triplex and an ADU. You could do one larger house and, an ADU. And so it gives the opportunity to kind of mix and match on any individual property what the needs of that household or group of households is. And so I think that's the real eye, if you will, towards the policy goal, is to give more people more choices in terms of how to set up, different sizes of houses on individual lots.
Yes, so it's basically trying to be more flexible on what gets built, more typologies. And also, if you think about a 4,500 square foot house, it's huge. So this limit is really very high. And if you look at these numbers, I mean, what we see the most is the 2,500 square foot house right now in Redmond, which is also pretty big, right? So, and I also did a little bit of analysis in what we have in duplexes, and the ones that appear, the number that appears the most for a duplex here, which we have very few in Redmond, is, I don't know if you can see this, it's 2,500 and 3,500. So this is for 2 units. So I think the number is pretty high. So we are limiting very, very little, I would say. If you wanted to be more aggressive, you could be, because just thinking about the size of this single family home, it's really very, very big. The limit is very, very high.
So my reaction on this, because we went around and around about the 4,500 last time, and anytime we start quibbling that much over a number, like you've used the word random, some people last meeting said arbitrary, and it kind of just is. And so there's sort of a judgment call in here. I was thinking what, like other things that we've talked about or that I'm seeing in surrounding cities that seem to be generating less like tug of war over should the number be bigger, should it be littler. And I really still like the combination of setback, height, lot coverage, and FAR, because it there isn't like as much of a values judgment. You're in the zoning code, you're talking about like massing. You're talking about how much is this house an imposition on its neighbors. You're talking about just basically how the space works. 4,500 square foot home, it's hard to feel good about a new one of those showing up in your neighborhood in a way where I just think the language around the setbacks, the height, the lot coverage, and the FAR is a lot easier to understand why that's fair. So I kind of prefer that style. And then if we could ever have something where we're really incenting that middle housing, like using those 4 variables and then incenting the middle housing in especially the infill development, that would make more sense to me. It doesn't feel like there's quite as much of a tug of war over the number, because I don't want a 4,500 square foot limit, but I can also argue it both ways, and I think we're really hearing that. So it doesn't feel like quite the right metric to me because of that. It's so arbitrary. It's a judgment call.
I think I would second that. I would not want to see a 4,500 square foot monstrosity show up on a small lot next to me. But if Sam Altman decided he needed to spend more time at Microsoft, bought 10 acres and wanted to build a 5,000 square foot home, that shouldn't be an issue. So I do feel that it is a bit arbitrary, and I feel that the 4 variables you mentioned, which are used basically everywhere across the United States to determine whether or not the structure you're building is suitable to a neighborhood and, for the zoning, I think those seem reasonable, but I can understand why 4,500 square foot being plopped down in your neighborhood seems like a lot, because in most neighborhoods it would be.
And there'd still be setbacks at play. So that one we're sort of saying that's going to exist no matter what. And height, we've said it might exist, but maybe like the setbacks and or the height might be something that's much, or especially the height might be so, because I feel very differently about you have multiple units and you're going to 3 stories than I do that like one house towers over me at 3 stories. It has a different feel. Commissioner Woodyear.
Yeah, I think
Vice Chair Woodyear.
I think my bigger issue is I'm just not connecting the dots in how a 4,500 or a 5,500 or 6,000 square foot individual unit equates to middle housing. To me, it's upper end housing. Pardon? What?
So I'm going to say this out loud to try and answer your question, because I still struggle with it too. So this is me processing. The goal is to push people away from, toward other options, I should say. That when you look at the other chart, the one below the next one down in the slide deck there, that one, the more dwellings that you provide, the more square footage you get. So the goal is to push people to say, to additional units.
Which means smaller footprint, smaller square footage.
It means more square footage
In
on
aggregate.
the same, it means more dwelling units on the same amount of property. And you're incentivizing people to do that by putting up these limits. That's the goal. Right? Yes.
Well, I could quibble and say that we're trying to pull people towards that. But yeah, you're right. So to go back to, what I was trying to summarize earlier, you apply R8 dimensional standards to a half-acre lot, maybe that Sam Altman buys, and you don't have these caps. Sam Altman gets to have a 22,000 square foot house. And that's what this is attempting to address is, yes, the number is arbitrary at 4,500, but it needs to be something. And if the Planning Commission wants to propose a different number, I think that's totally fine. But the issue, having worked in very affluent communities before, is that people will build a 22,000 square foot house next to you. And that's not a fantasy. And so it's not a 4,500 square foot house that we're trying to present or prevent. It's something much larger than that, a structure that is completely out of scale with the neighborhood. And that's why we've come up with this kind of sliding scale, is that any individual structure needs to be 4,500 square feet as a maximum. You know, if you build two structures, you can do, you know, a 3,500 square foot house or two 3,000 square foot houses, you know. So I think that's the reality. Plus, I think it's important to understand that the numbers, in full disclosure, are about the data. So the data on the previous slide in that bar chart, that's from King County's square footage numbers, and that includes, you know, basically all habitable area within a structure. It also includes things like covered decks, which we don't necessarily capture in our gross square footage area. So you could have a 45 square foot house above ground, and then you could have another level below grade. So, you know, and depending upon the topography of the lot, that could be a walkout. You know, so there's a lot of permutations here. What we're trying to do here is to avoid a situation where someone can construct a very, very large structure based upon dimensional standards that are really intended to apply to, you know, a 6,000 square foot lot.
Commissioner Woodyear.
Can you remind me, what is the square footage definition of a lot? Is it an acre?
I'm not.
Yeah, what is
So,
the dimension size of a lot?
3,000 square feet.
So lots can be any size. So, you know, the way that our system currently works is we've got everything from R1, and the minimum lot size is 1 acre, 43,560 square feet, all the way down to R8, which is, let me just use my calculator here, which is going to be about a 5,500 square foot lot. So that's what we're like, literally taking this accordion and just smushing it all down and trying to right size the dimensional standards and prevent unintended consequences is really the purpose behind the numbers that you see on this slide.
Yeah, so my preference would still be to see like a combination of lot coverage and FAR being used, which is the floor area ratio. So it's like similar to square feet, but not exactly the same, to incentivize more of the middle housing development. Is that
yes,
possible?
Can I jump in real quick on the FAR?
Please do.
So the state law is now requiring us to allow up to 8 units per lot. So if we are not using FAR for these residential regulations, for the neighborhood residential regulations, because of this requirement. So we are not looking at FAR right now. And I don't think I don't know if it's something that we want to explore at this point, because of the way the state law is written. It is kind of hard to set up FAR with those requirements. So we are not going to be, so what happens right now is if we don't regulate by total square footage or gross floor area, we have the same setbacks already for all of the residential regulations. So we can just basically go, if we look at this here, remember we did an analysis on the size, they would go up to here. Like that's what's allowed right now, if we don't cap it somewhere else. Right, so that's what we have. So that's what we have right now. And we wouldn't be changing anything. We could get huge structures if we just use the setbacks. And we don't have FAR for this, but we do have the height.
I'm not sure I follow why FAR doesn't apply here. I'm sorry, I'm just missing that piece.
We don't use floor area ratio currently in the single family residential districts. So that's not something that we use, and we don't want to introduce it as part of this amendment to implement middle housing, because it's fairly complicated. And so what we're trying to do is rely on the same set of dimensional standards that we currently use, which consists of building height, setbacks, lot coverage, and impervious surface coverage. So those are the kind of tools in the toolbox, the specific standards that we're using here. And what Audra is trying to show with the slide is that, you know, if we allow it without having any type of cap, we get buildings that, you know, vastly exceed all of those standards. And so we're trying to winnow it down. And not result in the type of outcomes here where you've got kind of 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. Thank you.
Sure.
So what I'm wondering then is if this is going to sound a little bit odd, but if we could add more to the table. Because right now we're using square footage as like the end-all be-all piece. And if we actually include pieces like setbacks, the height's going to be the same all across at 38, but include that. The lot coverage percentage, the impervious surface coverage, it kind of takes the focus off of that 4,500 number in a way that makes it clear what we're trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, so to be clear, that's all in the draft code amendment that's being considered by Planning Commission. We've just kind of pulled out this particular metric, if you will, this particular standard for purposes of discussion, because we've kind of winnowed down to that particular issue as one of the few remaining issues. So that's why you're just seeing it as a standalone table. But the actual regulation, the actual code, will have a table that includes all of those dimensional standards that we've been talking about, in addition to the maximum floor area based upon number of units. So it'll be a package.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we went over this during our first meeting on the setbacks. I know there's a table somewhere that has all those. Let me go, maybe it's somewhere else.
I can share the code real quick.
Yeah.
Pull that up.
Lovely. Okay, so we're going to go through some commissioners who are like bursting with questions. So Commissioner Whittier is passing. Commissioner Van Nymen.
So mine is just to follow up on what you were saying, is that the presentation of the information in the table would be better as a whole for us and for City Council if it was.
I think it might be.
The table would be more useful. One comprehensive table.
Commissioner
Yeah,
Whittier.
and so
It might prevent other people from getting, wrapped around the axle.
I was going
spun
to try
out,
not
sure.
to split hairs here, but like one comprehensive table just makes it easy to visualize what the implications are for 4,500 square foot, 2,500 square foot, the setbacks, et cetera, et cetera. It's just easier to kind of pull it all together to really understand what we're saying yes or no to.
I've got on the screen the first table, and the second page shows the second table. So we can share that. This first table just has all the structural standards, and then the reason why they have it as a separate table is because part of the incentives is the more units you want, the more that space increases. So it'd be really hard to combine those two together into one table. So if you
Got
see
it.
them
So
both
it's the
together,
slide that's confusing. Perhaps if the slide could be updated.
yeah, so again, we are not trying to gloss over the.
I know the city
go ahead,
council
I'm sorry.
will, I'm so sorry. Then I know the city council will look at the presentation, and I think that number is just, we are showing it's contentious. If we can put it in a broader context, I think it becomes much less contentious.
Agree. Yeah, so just for the benefit of the new commissioners, so we started this, 6 weeks ago with a very, very broad presentation that was an overview of all of the code amendments. And as we've kind of worked through this with the Planning Commission and gone through the public hearing, we've kind of taken it and winnowed it down to the few remaining issues, one of which is total square footage, which the Planning Commission flagged as an issue that they wanted to discuss in more detail. And that's the reason why you're not seeing a full set of information in your presentation for tonight's meeting.
Commissioner Coleman.
So why not 4,000 versus 4,500?
All right, so now we're getting into it. Does anyone have comments on that?
again, that's where we actually encouraged the planning commission when we first presented this information to have the discussion is what do you feel is the right number? You know, we're proposing 4,500, you know, as I indicated earlier, based upon the data that we have. If the planning commission feels that that number should be higher or lower, you know, I think that that's well within the purview for planning commission's discussion. And if there's information that we can bring back to you to inform that discussion, we're happy to do that.
Hey, Tim.
Just a second. Is this a follow-up on the previous?
It's a follow-up, just quickly, which is, there's like an emotive and a rational part to this, right? So we're saying, hey, we could choose this or that, but there's no real kind of reason for one or the other. But if we looked at actually, again, go back to percentages, if we said, at the end of this said, hey, 3%, we're basically capping 3% of the current amount. That's just a signal, right? That's what we're trying to give a message. If we said it's 4,000, that's nearly 10%, well, that's 8%, 8%,
yep.
which is probably not dissimilar, but it's a bigger number. So that, you know, 3.3% to me is like, it's a bit of a hand wave, and we're just trying to make a signal. 8% is a stronger statement. And the question is like which one we want. And I honestly don't have an opinion on either. I just wanted to make that as an observation of how we might think about it.
Great.
Understood.
Commissioner Copley, then Glenn.
Hey, Tim, I just wanted to say that this is very, very good work. I think it deserves to be recognized. I've looked at the zoning code and the residential regulations of probably 150 cities over the last 7 years. And the streamlining work you guys have done is exceptional. Complexity is exclusionary, and the streamlining and simplification you guys have done is inclusionary. And so I just want to recognize that and applaud that. And I do think that the effect of a lot of the changes being made here is really to increase density, to upzone, and to send a message to people that may be considering Redmond as a part of their future that we want you here, as opposed to the zoning code that you might see in the Bay Area or other places. So I do want to applaud that. I think there's a lot of good questions being asked here and a lot of nitpicking that is good, that needs to happen. But I didn't want to forget to tell you guys that I really appreciate the work you guys have done here.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I've done very little of this work. It's actually Audra and Kim Dietz and Ian Lefcourt who've done all the heavy lifting. I'm just here because I process permits, and so I'm kind of where the rubber hits the road. So people don't let me near code anymore.
Then my only request to you is let's get a streamlined ADU permitting process.
Yes, absolutely. So that's a big part, not to go off topic here, but so there's the work here that the Planning Commission and City Council are doing, and then we've also got a parallel process that's internal to city staff. That is, how are we going to manage this permitting and basically reinvent our permitting system to allow this to happen from the first permit that is submitted for middle housing development. We want that to go through cleanly and seamlessly. So that's kind of more the behind the scenes work, but you know, we are focused on that.
All right, next is Glenn, and then Denise.
I just had two process comments. One, just to remind that the chair calls on people when speaking. Second thing is just a time notice that we only have about 5 minutes left on this item because we still have one more agenda item. And if we want to go past 10, we have to do a vote and everything. So just those two items, and then that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Commissioner Gagne has one more comment.
Thank you. I think it's part comment, part question. Do we have to have a square footage maximum in here?
No.
No, we do not.
Okay. Then I'll share sort of my comment is I have a really negative reaction to any type of restriction on the square footage. And I think some of the discussion that I'm hearing here talking about how you want to avoid a structure that's out of scale with the neighborhood. For me, where it lands is, it sounds to me like some of the opposition reasons why people don't want the arch housing that's coming is because they're afraid of what that just doesn't fit the scale of the neighborhood, that a place that's going to house formerly unhoused folks. To me, putting any type of square footage maximum carries a lot of judgment, and I'm hearing in other areas we talk about we want them welcome and we want folks to have flexibility, and putting something there to me sends a signal and places judgment on folks' freedoms and how folks their life choices. And I just personally have a very negative reaction to any limitation there.
Becky.
Just to follow up with Glenn's comment, I do want to propose a way to move forward. One of the things that we would like to do is identify items that need to come back and the items that don't. So if these are the last two items, there's nothing left open on the issues matrix, Audra, is that correct?
Can I just
Yes,
put
please.
two things
I do
on
too.
quickly? So there were two proposed red lines. One was for allowing bonus square footage underground. I'm personally opposed. If anyone would like to see that, can you please get behind it to put it on the issues matrix? Okay, that one's not looking like a winner. And then the second proposed red line was garages should count towards the maximum square footage. I personally find that confusing. Usually they wouldn't. So to have a unusual law that bends it just in terms of, I think that's going to cause a lot of headaches. Yeah, it's just, I personally wouldn't like to see that. Would anyone here like to see that red line? Commissioner Van Nymen.
I think it's confusing. I mean, I know it's written there, but generally speaking, that's like if I go to look at a house, right? If you're looking at a real estate listing, garage is not included in that number, is it?
No.
Right. So that's how people process that information.
Right, and the King County website would not include a garage. So I think we should be consistent. Would anyone prefer not to be consistent and keep this red line, or should we talk about this other ways?
So I have a very quick question. What if someone takes the garage and converts it? Because we have a neighbor that's done that. How does that work?
Wait, sorry, one more time?
Oh, if you have a garage, sorry, I say garage rather than garage, so apologies. What's the situation if you want to convert it? We have a neighbor who did that, converted their garage, and it gives you more square footage as the house. Have we got any thoughts on that? I'm not quite sure if that comes into this at all.
Yeah, there's a lot of other permitting. Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't be able to, so if you had a 4,000 square foot house, and you wanted to convert your 600 square foot garage to living space, you wouldn't be able to do it under this. That's how that would work.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, but this isn't a real estate listing. This is a zoning code. And so I need to draw a distinction there in terms of what it is that you're interested in regulating. If you're interested in regulating the size of structures, a garage is part of the structure, right? You can see it. If you have a 5-car garage, that's a heck of a lot bigger house than if you have a 1-car garage. And that's what we're trying to get to here. So that's the purpose behind why we're including these things, is because it's mass, it's volume, it takes up space on a lot. Whereas things that are below ground, you don't see them. And so, if your garage is below ground, then, you can have, that doesn't count. But otherwise, any above ground space, in my opinion, it should count towards the maximum. We shouldn't, why would we want to incentivize someone having a 6-car, 10-car garage?
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut it here because we are very, very close on time. So perhaps we will continue the garage next time. That should go on the matrix. All right, thank you, everyone. This was a very, very long discussion. We did it without a break, so good job. We are going to quickly go through staff and commissioner updates with Glenn.
Hi. Only staff update is that next week, which is not our regularly scheduled, second and fourth, is what we call our annual retreat, which now is a little bit less formal. So it's actually here at City Hall in the Council Conference Chamber, which is the room right there. It is open to the public, but it's not a traditional planning commission meeting, like these type of items, there's nothing to vote on or consider. So, so it's a little bit more laid back. Our Public Works Director, Aaron Burt, will be on hand to kind of provide the context of what the Public Works Department does and in context of how that fits into planning. Additionally, we have our Economic Development Manager is going to be presenting on our economic development strategy. Again, that's an item that isn't reviewed by Planning Commission. There's no regulatory aspects to that, but she will present on that item. And then we'll also have some items just regarding Planning Commission norms, kind of the processes of how we kind of run the meetings and votes and kind of review some of that information. And then whatever other topics not related to legislative items before, we can also have a discussion about. So again, that is next week in the room next door, and it is open to the public. So, and then besides that, April 24th is our regular meeting. And again, there'll be those recommendations and some of the issues. I think this item's coming back. So that's all I have.
Great. I do have something I would like to share too, though. One of the things that we've been doing is adding a lot of resources on the website for covering the changes and explaining the changes. So if you haven't seen it yet, we just sent out our new Gov Delivery Blast. If you're not on our email, I would encourage you to be on it. We've sent out direct links to our zoning district consolidation page that talks about what's going from what district to what and what the new standards we're playing with. We also have the land use table updates that we've shared with Planning Commission, the table, and that is information. Also brand new as of yesterday, we have a list of Redmond zoning code table of changes that are coming and links to the latest versions of those and when it's going to go into effect, where in the review cycle it is. Kim Dietz and I am still working on that and providing some of that, but that is also going to be a really good resource because people are getting confused about, is this under this package or that package or whatnot? We now just have one big table that shows all the sections in the Redmond zoning code and exactly how many of them are being touched, and there's only like 3 that aren't. And then you can actually go in and see the latest version of each draft of those sections of code. So again, if you're not on the email list, I would encourage you to be on it. And if you haven't clicked on those links in the distribution that went out today, I encourage you to go play around with that because it should be super helpful to get into some of the bits and pieces, because right now a lot of it's stuck like as a page within an attachment within the Planning Commission recommendation report or something along those lines. So I just wanted to point that out, that it's out there now.
It is very cool. Are there any commissioner updates? All right, well then I will look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, then we're adjourned.